This land is our inheritance, Chigozie. It will become very valuable soon. You must always protect it.
Not my uncle, not my stepmother, not one single soul in that village called me to say, Chigozie, your father is dead. He died 3 weeks before I found out and buried within 3 days of his death, which means he had already been in the ground for over 2 weeks by the time anyone told me. Over 2 weeks. While I was in Lagos, going to work every morning, cooking dinner every night, laughing at jokes on my phone, my father's body was already cold in the earth, and the people who buried him knew exactly where I was. If you are new here, welcome. Stay till the end because this story has turns you will not see coming. And if stories like this keep you glued to your screen, hit that subscribe button now because we are about to go somewhere dark. My name is Chigozie. I was 26 years old the year my father died, and this is the story of how I found out, what I found when I went home, and what happened when I refused to let his death be buried as quietly as his body was. My father's name was Pa Obumneme. Everyone in the village called him Papa Obum. He was a proud man, not rich but respected. He had a small parcel of land behind our family compound that had been passed down from his own father, land that by the time he died had become worth more than anyone in that family had ever seen in cash. I didn't know that then. I would learn it later. And when I did, everything would make a terrible kind of sense. I grew up in that village until I was 12. Then my father, wanting something better for me, sent me to live with his cousin in Lagos so I could attend a better school. It broke something in both of us, that separation, but he called me every single week, every Sunday, 7 o'clock in the evening, like a prayer. "Ennem, how is Lagos treating you?" he would ask. And I would tell him about school, about work, about my small apartment, about the man I almost married and the one I finally didn't. He listened to all of it. For 14 years, he never missed a Sunday. Until he did. It was a Sunday in March when my phone didn't ring. I remember exactly what I was doing, stirring a pot of stew, waiting for 7 o'clock like I always did. 7 went and came. 7:30, 8. I told myself network wahala. Village networks fail all the time. I called him instead. It rang and went to voicemail. I called again the next day, voicemail. I called my uncle, his younger brother, a man named Namdi, who lived 2 houses down from my father in the village. "Uncle, good evening. Please, is Papa okay?" He didn't call me. There was a pause on the line. A pause that, looking back now, told me everything, if only I had known how to listen. "He's fine," Uncle Namdi said. "He's just resting. Old man things. You know how it is. Don't worry yourself." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my father's own blood brother. If something was wrong, he would tell me. That is what family is for. That is what I believed, foolishly, for 2 more weeks. Though he was the younger brother, Uncle Namdi had taken a chieftaincy title of his own years earlier, which meant that in the eyes of the compound, he carried the weight and authority of an elder, whatever his birth order said. That mattered more than I understood at the time. I called every few days. Sometimes Uncle Namdi answered and gave me the same tired excuses. "Papa is sleeping. Papa is at the farm. Papa's phone battery is dead." Sometimes nobody answered at all. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself village life was slow and things took time and old men rested more than they used to. I told myself so many lies to protect myself from a truth I could feel creeping toward me like a shadow before sunset. Then, one evening, a childhood friend of mine, a boy I grew up with named Ifeanyi, who still lived in the village and worked at the local secondary school, sent me a message on WhatsApp. Just one line. "Chigozie, I'm so sorry for your loss. When are you coming home for the second burial?" I read that message maybe 10 times. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I typed back with fingers that didn't feel like mine. Whose loss? What are you talking about? The three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. It felt like an eternity. Your father, Chigozie, Papa Obun, he passed 3 weeks ago. I thought somebody told you. I'm so sorry. I thought you knew. I want you to understand something. I did not scream. I did not cry, not at first. I simply sat on my kitchen floor, my back against the cupboard, and stared at those words until the letters stopped making sense. Your father, passed 3 weeks ago, buried for over 2 of those weeks. I thought somebody told you. Nobody told me. They had already buried him.
Before we go further, if this story is already pulling at something in you, drop a like and hit subscribe, because what I found when I went home was worse than the silence. I booked the first bus to the east that same night. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I sat by the window of that rickety bus for 9 hours, watching Lagos give way to bush, then bush give way to the familiar red roads of home. And my mind would not stop asking the same question over and over. Why? Why would they not tell me? Why would my father's own brother look me in the face through a phone but still and lie to me for 2 straight weeks while they buried him? By the time I reached the village, it was almost noon. The compound looked the same as it always had. The low fence, the mango tree my father planted the year I was born, the veranda where he used to sit with his radio pressed to his ear. But something about it felt wrong, like a photograph of a place I used to know, slightly out of focus. Nobody came to greet me. In our culture, that alone should have told me something. When a daughter returns home after her father's death, the women of the compound rush out. They wail with you, they hold you. Instead, the compound was quiet. A few neighbors peeked from behind curtains and quickly looked away. An old woman selling groundnuts by the roadside saw me, opened her mouth as if to speak, then shook her head and looked down at her tray instead. I found my stepmother, Mama Obiora, my father's second wife, the woman he married 4 years after my own mother died, sitting alone on the veranda, shelling melon seeds into a bowl like it was any other afternoon. She looked up at me, and I will never forget the expression on her face. It wasn't grief. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. It was fear. Behind her, just visible through the doorway, I noticed Uncle Namdi's wife, my aunt Nkechi, standing frozen in the passage with a bowl in her hands, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite place before she quickly stepped back out of sight. I didn't think much of it then. I would think about it a great deal later. Chigozie, Mama Obiora said, standing so fast the bowl of seeds spilled across the floor. You've come. I've come, I said, and my voice did not sound like my own. You buried my father, and nobody called me. She didn't answer right away. She bent down, slowly, and began gathering the scattered seeds, not looking at me, her hands trembling. It happened so fast, there was no time. The elders said for a man of his age, of his standing, the burial had to happen quickly. It is our custom. Our custom, I repeated, is that the man's own daughter is told before he is put in the ground. Not after, not weeks after, before. Talk to your uncle, she said, still not meeting my eyes. Talk to Namdi. He handled everything. Handled everything. Those 2 words would echo in my head for days. I want you to notice something because it matters. Mama Obiora did not defend herself. She did not explain herself. She pointed me toward my uncle like a woman eager to hand off blame before it could land on her. At the time, I thought it was cowardice. Later, I would understand it was something else entirely. But we are not there yet. Stay with me. I found Uncle Namdi at his house, sitting outside under a canopy with two other men I didn't recognize, drinking palm wine like it was a celebration and not the aftermath of his own brother's death. When he saw me approaching, something flickered across his face, not surprise because he must have known I would come eventually, but calculation, like a man quickly rehearsing lines in his head. "Chigozie, my daughter," he said, standing and opening his arms as if to embrace me. I did not move toward him. Don't touch me. Tell me why. Tell me why you let me find out from a text message from Ifeanyi. Tell me why you looked me in the eye through the phone and told me my father was resting when he was already dead." The first two men beside him quietly excused themselves and disappeared into the compound the way men do when they smell trouble coming. "Sit down," Namdi said. "Let me explain." "I don't want to sit. I want to understand." He sighed, the sigh of a man who has already decided his story and is only waiting for permission to tell it. "Your father took ill suddenly, very suddenly. One night he complained of pain in his chest and by morning he was gone. You know how these things happen with old men. The elders came together and said because of the suddenness, because of the condition of the body in this heat, we had no choice but to bury him quickly. There was no time to reach you properly." "No time," I said slowly. "Uncle, you have my number. You called me the very week he died and told me he was resting. You had time to lie to me. You didn't have time to tell me the truth." For the first time, his composure cracked, just slightly, just enough for me to see something underneath it. "I was protecting you," he said. "I didn't want you traveling alone at night, rushing, making a mistake on the road because of grief. I was going to tell you after the burial, gently, and bring you home for the second burial ceremony so you could grieve properly without the chaos of a rushed funeral."
It sounded almost reasonable. Almost. If you didn't know my uncle, if you hadn't grown up watching how his eyes moved when he spoke, calculating, always calculating, even when we were children and he was cheating on Ludo with his own nephews. I had learned as a girl never to trust the sound of his voice when it turned soft like that. Soft was when he was most dangerous. "Where is he buried?" I asked. "I want to see his grave." Something passed behind his eyes, just for a second. "Behind the house," he said, "where your grandfather is buried. Come, I'll take you." He took me, and when I stood over that fresh mound of earth, no headstone yet, just a wooden cross with my father's name scratched into it in Uncle Namdi's own handwriting, I felt something in my chest break open that I don't think will ever fully heal. I knelt in the dirt. I pressed my palms into the ground like I could somehow reach him through it. I cried the way I had never cried in my life, not even when my mother died, because at least with my mother, I had been there. I had held her hand. I had said goodbye. My father died alone, or not alone, surrounded by people who chose deliberately not to let me be one of them. If you've ever lost someone and felt like the world moved on without waiting for you to catch up, you understand exactly what I felt kneeling in that dirt. And if this story is holding you the way it's holding me telling it, subscribe now because we haven't even gotten to the part that changed everything. I stayed in the village for 3 days after that, sleeping in my childhood room, surrounded by things my father had kept exactly as they were. My old school certificates on the wall, a photograph of the 3 of us, my mother, my father, and me, taken before I turned 10. Every corner of that house whispered him to me, and every whisper made the wound deeper. On the second day, Ifaye came to see me. We sat outside under the mango tree, and he told me things carefully, the way a man tells a woman bad news he is afraid will break her. "Chigozie, I don't want to speak ill of anybody," he began, "but there are things people are saying in the village, things I think you should know." "Say it," I told him. "Whatever it is, say it." He hesitated. "Your father's land," he said carefully, "the one behind the compound, near the new road, do you know what it's worth now?" I shook my head. I genuinely did not know. The government road contractors have been buying land along that stretch, paying good money, real money, Chigozie, the kind that changes a man's whole life. Your father's plot sits right at the edge of it. People say it could be worth 8, maybe 9 million naira now, maybe more. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And your uncle, Ifeanyi said carefully, has been in serious debt. Everyone knows it. He borrowed heavily 2 years ago for a business that failed. Men have been coming to his house asking for money, threatening him, some say. I stared at him. The pieces were beginning to arrange themselves into a shape I did not want to see. You think my uncle had something to do with my father's death? I said. It wasn't a question anymore. Ifeanyi looked away out toward the road and did not answer right away. I'm not saying that, he finally said. I'm only saying, your father was not a sick man, Chigozie. 2 months ago, he was at my mother's burial ceremony, dancing, eating pepper soup, drinking with the other elders. A man like that does not simply drop dead of chest pain overnight. And a burial that fast for a titled man with no proper wakekeeping, no announcement, no time for family to gather. That is not our custom. That is not how we bury our fathers. I sat with that for a long time, the mango leaves rustling above us, the afternoon heat pressing down like a weight. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong from the very first phone call when my uncle told me my father was resting. I just hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went through my father's small wooden desk in the corner of his room, the one he used to write letters and keep his farm records. Most of it was ordinary, receipts, an old Bible, letters from years ago. But tucked into the back of the second drawer, folded so small it fit in my palm, I found a piece of paper that stopped my heart. It was a letter, in my father's handwriting, dated only 9 days before Ifeanyi's message told me he had died. My dear Chigozie, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me, and I need you to know certain things before anyone tells you otherwise. My hands shook so badly I nearly tore the page. He wrote that he had been feeling strange for weeks, dizziness, stomach pain that came and went, a bitterness in his mouth after meals that he could not explain. He wrote that he suspected someone in the house was putting something in his food, though he did not want to accuse anyone without proof, not even in a private letter, because he still hoped he was wrong. He wrote that he had gone quietly to change his will at the small law office in the next town without telling his brother, because he had begun to fear what might happen to his land, my inheritance, if something happened to him before I could be told the truth. He wrote that he loved me, that he was proud of me, that whatever happened, he wanted me to fight for what was mine and not to trust blindly, not even family, not even blood.
The letter ended there, unfinished, as if he meant to write more and never got the chance. I sat on my father's bedroom floor and read that letter maybe 20 times, my whole body trembling, tears falling onto the paper and smudging his careful handwriting. My father had known. He had known someone was hurting him, and he had died before he could tell me, or before anyone let him tell me. And then his own brother had buried him in the ground so fast there had been no time for questions, no time for a doctor to look closer, no time for anyone to ask why a healthy 61-year-old man simply dropped dead overnight. If you thought you knew where this story was going, I promise you, you don't. Because what I discovered next was not what I expected either. Make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story is the part nobody saw coming, not even me. The next morning, I went straight to Mama Obiora. I did not knock gently. I walked into her room while she was folding cloth, and I placed my father's letter on the table in front of her. "Read it," I said. She looked at it, then at me, and something in her face changed. The fear I had seen on the veranda the day I arrived deepened into something closer to panic. "Where did you find this?" she whispered. "In his desk. He knew, Mama. He knew someone was poisoning him, and you sat on that veranda and told me nothing. You told me to go and talk to my uncle. Why?"
She was quiet for a long moment, her hands still on the folded cloth, not moving. Then slowly she began to cry, not the performative crying I had half expected from a woman with something to hide, but something raw, something that came from deep in her chest. "I was afraid," she said. "Chigozie, listen to me. The day your father died, I was the one who found him in the morning. He was already cold. He had complained of stomach pain the night before, the same pain he had been having for weeks, but he had gone to bed seemingly fine. By morning, he was gone. And before I could even properly grieve, before the neighbors had even finished gathering, your uncle was already at the house, already speaking to the elders, already insisting the burial happened within 3 days because of the heat, because he said your father had specifically told him in confidence that he wanted no delay if anything ever happened to him." Something cold moved through me as she spoke, a detail I almost missed in my grief. "Wait," I said. "Uncle Namdi told me Papa complained of pain in his chest that night and was gone by morning. You just said stomach pain. Which one is it, Mama? Because those are not the same story." She stared at me, and I watched the realization land on her face too, as if she was hearing her own words against his for the first time. "I don't know," she whispered. "All I know is what I saw. Stomach pain. He held his stomach, not his chest." "That's a lie," I said. "My father wrote to me 9 days before he died. He wanted me told. He wanted me there." "I know that now," Mama Obiora said. "I didn't know it then. I only knew that your uncle moved so fast, so certain, that I had no room to question anything. And when I tried, gently, to ask whether we should wait for you, he told me in a voice I had never heard him use before, that I should mind my place in this house, that decisions about the Obum family land and legacy were not for a second wife to interfere in." "Chigozie, listen to me. I was afraid of what he would do to me if I pushed further. I am still afraid." I stood there in that room, holding my father's unfinished letter, listening to the woman I had half suspected of betraying me, instead confess to being trapped in her own private terror. It was not the twist I expected. I had walked into that house ready to blame her. Instead, I found a woman who had been silenced the same way I had, just in a different room by the same man. But knowing was not enough. Suspecting was not enough. I needed proof. And in a village like ours, proof against a man like my uncle, a man with money now dangling in front of him, a man other elders respected, a man who had already convinced the whole community that a rushed, quiet burial was simply tradition. Proof would not be easy to find. That night, Ifeanyi helped me. He knew a nurse at the small clinic in town, a young woman named Ifelma who had been on duty the week my father died. Ifeanyi arranged for me to speak with her quietly, away from the village, at a small buka on the edge of town where nobody from our family would think to look.
Ifeoma was nervous. She kept glancing over her shoulder as she spoke, stirring her drink without drinking it. "Your uncle came to the clinic that week," she told me, her voice low. "Not for himself. He came asking questions about a particular herb, a local preparation some farmers use for pest control on their crops, though it has other darker uses too, if taken in the wrong doses over time. He asked the older nurse, not me, what symptoms a person would show if they consumed small amounts of it regularly. Stomach pain, dizziness, bitterness in the mouth, confusion near the end. The same symptoms my father described in his letter. Did anyone report this? I asked, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Did anyone report what? Ifeoma said, almost bitterly. A man asking questions is not a crime, and by the time your father died, there was no autopsy, no investigation. He was buried within 3 days. There was nothing left to examine, even if anyone had dared to ask. I sat with that horror for a long moment. My uncle had been careful, terribly, methodically careful. He had asked his questions weeks in advance, poisoned his own brother slowly enough that it looked like natural decline, and then buried the evidence, literally, before anyone could question the speed of it all.
But he made one mistake. He didn't know about the letter. I want to pause here and remind you, if a story like this deserves your attention, it deserves a subscribe too. Because what happens next is the confrontation this whole story has been building toward, and it did not go the way anyone expected, including me. I went to the village elders, not my uncle, not the family alone. I requested a formal meeting of the compound's council of elders, the men and women whose words still carried weight in matters like land, inheritance, and disputes within families. It is not a small thing for a young woman to summon such a meeting against an elder like my uncle, but I no longer cared about smallness. My father had written to me, with what might have been his final clear days of strength, telling me to fight for what was mine. I intended to fight. The meeting was held under the same canopy where I had first confronted my uncle, except now it was filled. Elders in wrapper and agbada, neighbors curious about the commotion, Mama Obiora sitting close to me for the first time since I'd arrived, no longer hiding behind fear. Uncle Namdi sat across from me, his face arranged into practiced calm, though I could see, if you knew where to look, the tightness at the corner of his jaw. I laid the letter on the table in front of the eldest elder, a man named Chigozie, who knew my father since they were boys. I said, my father wrote this 9 days before he died. He believed someone was poisoning him. He asked to change his will in secret because he feared what would happen to his land if he died before I was told. He was buried within 3 days with no message sent to me, no wake-keeping, no chance for anyone to examine his body or ask questions. I want to know why. Chigozie read the letter slowly, his lips moving faintly as he read, and the compound was so silent I could hear the mango leaves shifting above us. This is a serious accusation, he finally said, looking up at my uncle. Namdi, what do you say to this? My uncle's composure, which had held for 3 long days, finally began to slip. It is a grieving daughter's imagination, he said, though his voice had lost its earlier smoothness. My brother was old. Old men fall ill. There is nothing sinister in a quick burial. It is tradition when the body cannot wait in this heat. And the herb you asked the clinic about, the one that causes stomach pain, dizziness, confusion, the very symptoms my father described in his own hand? The silence that followed this time was different, heavier. I watched several of the elders exchange glances. I asked about that herb for my crops, pest control, nothing more. Then you wouldn't mind, Chigozie said slowly, if we send word to the state authorities to examine your brother's remains to put this matter to rest properly, one way or the other. If you are innocent, this will prove it. If you refuse, there is no need to disturb him further. He has already suffered enough. You admit it then, I said, standing now, my whole body shaking with a grief and fury I had been holding in for days. You admit you knew he suffered. He said nothing. He simply sat there, his hands gripping his knees, his eyes fixed on the ground, and in that silence, in that refusal to look up and deny it one final time, I finally understood the whole shape of what had happened to my father. But here is the twist I did not expect, the one I promised you at the beginning of this story. It was not my uncle who broke first and told the full truth. It was his own wife, my aunt, a quiet woman named Nkechi, who had said almost nothing throughout the entire ordeal. Standing at the back of the gathered crowd, she stepped forward, her voice trembling but clear. I have to speak, she said. I have carried this too long. The compound turned to look at her. My uncle's head snapped up, alarm flooding his face for the first time. Nkechi, sit down, he sharply said.
No, she said, and there was a strength in her voice I had never heard before. A woman who had clearly spent years being told to sit down and had finally decided she would not. I watched him mix something into a bottle of palm wine 2 weeks before Papa Obum died. I asked him what it was. He told me it was a tonic for his brother's joints, an old man's remedy. I believed him because I wanted to believe him, but I saw him bring that same bottle to his brother's house 3 times that week, and each time Papa Obum grew weaker. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself my husband would never do such a thing to his own blood. But I have not slept properly in weeks because somewhere in my heart I already knew. The silence that followed was the kind that changes a room forever. Uncle Namdi did not deny it this time. He simply put his face in his hands, and in that gesture, more than any words could have, he confessed to everything. Chigozie stood slowly, his voice heavy with the weight of what had just happened. "This matter is now beyond the elders of this compound," he said. "This is a matter for the police and for the courts and for whatever justice the state can provide. Namdi, you will remain here until they come. This council will not shield you." I won't pretend the days that followed were simple. They were not. In fact, the days right after that meeting under the canopy were some of the hardest of my entire life. Harder in some ways than the moment I first read Ifein's message. Because now the grief had company. Now there was anger sitting beside it, and fear, and a strange hollow kind of vindication that tasted nothing like victory. I had wanted to be wrong. Some small, stubborn part of me had hoped, right up until my aunt spoke, that there was an innocent explanation, that my uncle was simply a greedy man and not a murderous one, that I would find out my father truly had died of natural causes, and I could grieve cleanly without this second horror layered on top of the first. That hope died the moment Nchechi opened her mouth. The police came from the divisional headquarters 2 days after the elders' meeting. They were polite but thorough, the kind of thorough that comes when a case has already gathered too many witnesses to be brushed aside quietly. They took statements from Mama Obiora, from Nchechi, from Ifeoma at the clinic, from Ifeanyi, from me. They took the letter as evidence, sealing it carefully in a plastic sleeve, and something in me flinched to see my father's handwriting handled like proof in a criminal file, instead of the private words of a dying man to his daughter. But I understood why it had to be that way. Sometimes love has to become evidence before it can become justice. There was an official inquiry. There was an exhumation, painful beyond words for me to witness, though I insisted on being present, because my father deserved at least one person who loved him, standing there while the truth was finally, properly uncovered. The toxicology results, when they finally came weeks later, confirmed traces of a slow-acting poison consistent with the herb Ifeoma had described, administered, the investigators believed, over several weeks, which explained the strange worsening symptoms my father had written about in his final letter. My uncle was arrested. The land dispute that started this entire nightmare was resolved in my favor. My father's amended will, the one he had gone quietly to change 9 days before his death, recognized as valid and binding. The land near the new road, the land my uncle was willing to kill for, came to me exactly as my father had intended. But I want to tell you something, because this story is really not about land or even about justice, though those things matter deeply to me. This story is about what it means to lose someone twice. Once when they die, and once again when you realize the people who were supposed to protect their memory instead tried to erase you from it entirely. For 2 weeks, I did not know my father was gone. For 2 weeks, I lived a life that no longer matched reality, laughing at things, going to work, calling him in my mind before I remembered I couldn't anymore. That kind of grief does not heal the way ordinary grief heals. It leaves a strange, twisted scar, a permanent ache for the goodbye I never got to say.
We held a proper second burial for my father, months later, once everything had settled. It was nothing like the rushed, silent burial my uncle had arranged. The whole village came. There was music, there was dancing, the way our people danced to celebrate a life well lived. There was food enough to feed everyone twice over. Mama Obiora stood beside me the entire ceremony, no longer a frightened woman hiding behind fear, but someone I had come to see, finally, not as an obstacle in my story, but as another person my uncle had trapped and silenced, just as he had tried to silence me. We are not close, not the way I was close with my father, but we speak now. We understand each other in a way that only two people who survive the same storm can. Ifeanyi still lives in the village. I visit more often now, not because the pain is gone, but because staying away from that place felt, for a long time, like letting the silence win. My father's grave has a proper headstone now, carved with his full name, his birth year, and a line I chose myself. He told the truth, even when it cost him everything. Because that is what he did in the end. In his final days, weak and afraid and slowly being poisoned by his own blood, my father found the strength to write me a letter. Not to save himself. He must have known, somewhere in his heart, that he might not survive whatever was happening to him. He wrote to protect me, to warn me, to make sure that even if his voice was silenced, his hand on that paper would not be. They buried my father without telling me, but they could not bury the truth. And in the end, the truth is what brought him home. If this story moved you the way it moved me telling it, do something for me. Subscribe. Not because I'm asking for a favor, but because there are more stories like this one out there. Stories of families, of secrets, of the quiet wars fought inside compounds and behind closed doors, and I intend to keep telling them. Somewhere, right now, there is a daughter like me who doesn't yet know the truth she's about to uncover. Maybe telling these stories is how we make sure silence never wins again. Thank you for staying with me till the end. My father used to say that a story worth telling is a story worth finishing properly, all the way to the last word. So here it is, the last word. He is finally, truly resting in peace. And now, so am I.